everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is my Forbes colleague, entertainment reporter Matt Craig. Matt, thanks so much for joining me.
Hey, Brittany, it's been a while. It's good to be back with you.
Matt, it's really good to have you here because I want to talk about the really acrimonious fight that we've been seeing to buy Warner Brothers. I want to tick off a bullet point list from what we've seen since Friday, and if you could fill in the details for us, if you would. So on Friday, Netflix ultimately won the bidding war, despite Paramount Skydance being seen as the favorite. But you reported over the weekend that despite Netflix winning, the fight for control has only just begun. So then that leads us to Monday. On Monday, Paramount launched a hostile takeover bid for Warner Brothers. The offer is close to $18 billion more than Netflix's offer, plus that includes the cable channels. So talk to us here about the details in these two deals. What do you know?
Yeah, I guess I was just never really buying that the Ellisons were going to take their ball and go home. I thought that they were going to continue to fight for this, which is my initial thought on Friday when the Netflix deal was announced. And then obviously it kind of became true this morning when Paramount and the Ellisons announced that they would be attempting a hostile takeover bid, essentially taking a $30 per share offer directly to shareholders, the same offer, the final offer that they brought to David Zaslav and the Warner Brothers Discovery Board, which ultimately they turned down. So I guess there's kind of two separate tracks happening here. One is kind of the business track, which is that Paramount and Netflix have fundamentally different offers out on the table. Netflix wants to buy the studio and the streamer, meaning the Warner Brothers 100-year-old movie studio that creates content and the HBO Max streaming service after Warner Bros. Discovery splits into two separate companies, being the studio and the streamer on one side, and then the cable channels like TNT and TBS, CNN on the other side. Whereas Paramount wants to buy the whole enchilada. They want to buy the cable channels, which are seen as a declining asset, yet still throws off a lot of cash, and the growth assets being the studio and the streamer. So from a business standpoint, you could say this really comes down to, how you value those cable assets. Are they a $1 share piece of the company? Are they, which is what the Ellisons say, are they $3 piece of or $3 per share piece of the company, as the Warner Brothers folks say? And that's the differentiation between the values. But ultimately, that's kind of getting lost in the weeds a little bit from really the fact that Warner Brothers and David Zaslav preferred Netflix. They saw them as the better partner and chose to go with them. And again, the not nitty-gritty reason here being regulatory, whether Netflix can get this deal through the Federal Trade Commission, a potential Department of Justice antitrust lawsuit, if the Ellisons bring a lawsuit saying they're bargaining in bad faith, as they seem to have indicated in a letter to Warner Brothers. So yeah, there's kind of like the actual business fundamentals case that we can talk about, and then of course there's like the ego and Donald Trump aspect of things that we can also talk about. So yeah, there's lots and lots of angles to this ongoing deal negotiation.
So let's talk about that business angle first. And correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm just sitting here right now, based on the way you laid that out, why did Warner Brothers go with Netflix? Because it seemed like Paramount offered the better deal, more cash, and they are taking away that headache of the cable channels. Why pick Netflix then?
Yeah, well, it was actually kind of interesting. Like the initial response that Warner Brothers had when they found out the Ellisons were going to come pursue their company was like, why now? Because they were already splitting the company into these two separate entities, as I mentioned, the studio and streamer and the cable channels. And a lot of people have seen the Ellisons coming after both as really just a bargaining tactic because they knew the other suitors wouldn't want both sides of the deal. So it was kind of like a advantage that they had, they thought, over the competition. However, the company was splitting, and I think that fundamentally, they had already begun to think about what the reality would look like. And clearly, people were going to be interested in buying the studio and streamer side of things. And I think that ultimately they thought that Netflix was a better partner. I mean, they have the number one streaming service as far as, over $300 million or 300 million subscribers globally. And their business is in a more, I guess, fundamentally sound place. Whereas Paramount, they just merged with Skydance. There was just layoffs. There's lots of consolidation happening there, and a lot of questions to be asked. I mean, the Ellisons have already shown that they will invest money in the business. They've made some splashy deals, including with UFC. But I think Netflix is seen as kind of the juggernaut in the space, and Warner Brothers felt like they would be the better partner. Part of their deal is stock in Netflix. So as opposed to the Ellisons and Paramount's offer being 100% cash, Warner Brothers' offer is in cash and stock, mostly cash. They raised a lot of money in debt financing, but is also related to stock for Netflix. So I think that ultimately they thought Netflix would be the better partner for these assets, and maybe potentially less disruptive for the Hollywood ecosystem.
At the heart of this really contentious fight for control here is Warner Brothers. It's one of the oldest studios in the country. So I'm curious, what makes Warner Brothers so valuable? What are some of the highlights in their catalog? What are some of those most prized assets?
Yeah, no, it's interesting because I think from someone on the outside, you would say like, why would you need to look to sell if you're Warner Brothers? They're the number one studio this year. I mean, they've had tons of great hits from the Minecraft movie to One Battle After Another to Sinners, Weapons, and are kind of like on a hot streak as far as the movies they're releasing. And then of course, fundamental kind of like building block assets like the DC, superhero universe, meaning Superman, Batman. They also have the Harry Potter franchise, which is something that you can exploit not only in films and television, but is the kind of things that you can exploit with theme park rides, with toys, kind of that 360-degree flywheel kind of IP that, even Netflix, who is doing much, much better as a company, has not really generated the kinds of IP that we know will last forever. I think, probably their best known franchise is Stranger Things, which this is the final season of it. I'm sure they will do spin-offs, but I don't think Stranger Things will have the same, cultural impact as something like a Harry Potter. So Netflix, if you're looking at it, there's kind of like those iconic franchises that you can exploit the IP on your own platform, as well as, HBO Max has a proven track record of pumping out content that folks want to sign up for. The kind of business conundrum of HBO Max is they're very good at subscriber acquisition, getting people to sign up for a White Lotus or Game of Thrones, but then higher subscriber churn, where they're having a hard time holding on to subscribers. They'll sign up to watch a show and then they'll cancel. Versus Netflix has the best churn rate, in the business. Everyone pretty much has it like the utility. So if you can plug in HBO Max's international appeal and high quality programming into Netflix's system, I think that they see a lot of value there.
I'm curious where you think President Trump lands in all of this, because President Trump said that the Netflix deal could be a problem because of how much market share the streamer would end up with. Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law, his firm Affinity Partners is backing the Paramount Skydance bid, and the Trump administration supported the Ellisons acquiring Paramount. So is that a win in the Ellisons' book here?
No, I think that the most truthful thing that the president said this morning was that he would be involved in the process. I think we can definitely count on that. He wants to get involved in every big deal and every, especially something like media. So he will definitely be involved. I guess the real question is just how much he wants to put his finger on the scale. I think before, this past week, a lot of people would have said that he's firmly in the Ellison's camp. He's called Larry and David Ellison, great guys and friends. David Ellison said at a conference that he had a great relationship with the president. And I think the Ellisons have shown, the willingness to maybe get their hands dirty a little bit in the political process, whether it's, the $16 million lawsuit settlement against the 60 Minutes interview editing, whether it's the firing of Stephen Colbert, the hiring of Barry Weiss. I mean, I think directly or indirectly, they've shown their willingness to kind of placate the president to get what they want done. I mean, recently, they greenlit Rush Hour 4, which is a sequel that I'm not sure a lot of people in the industry were necessarily clamoring for, but with the thought that, President Trump wanted that to happen. So and that's part of the reason why I wrote the story I wrote over the weekend. I really think that the Ellisons, when you combine their wealth and again, their willingness to kind of play the political game, would have the upper hand in this process. However, I think it's interesting that Donald Trump didn't come out immediately on Truth Social with, some posts saying, "I can't believe the Ellisons didn't win this." He kind of was quiet for a long time and then had some comments this morning. But in other reporting and other outlets, we know that Ted Sarandos has a relationship with Donald Trump, and he was, in the Oval Office with the president last week, making his case for Netflix. President Trump said, there weren't any promises made, but I do think that they have a very, good relationship. And in this case, President Trump called him a great person this morning. So I think on both sides, he's found himself in a situation where maybe you have two sides that are willing to kiss up to the president and do things that they need to do to get his approval on the deal, which clearly seems like it's going to be an important part of this process.
And then either way, when you look at either Netflix or when you look at Paramount Skydance, then if you add Warner Brothers to the mix, there are concerns that either one could be a monopoly. I mean, how big of a factor is that? And is that going to be a hindrance for either Paramount or Netflix?
For sure. Yes, there will be a very, very intense regulatory review of this deal. We already have seen, Hollywood guilds coming out and saying it must be blocked. We've seen senators like, from across the aisle saying that this is a monopolistic, classic case of monopoly or a monopolistic nightmare in the case of Senator Warren. So I think that the kind of conspiracy theory that, Netflix would only put this forward to freeze Warner Brothers and the Ellisons for 2 years, and they don't have any expectation to go through, is that there's just no way you would go through the amount of scrutiny that they're going to face over the next year or two, just to then pay a $5.8 billion breakup fee and do it as kind of like a gamesmanship. No, I think clearly, Netflix sees value in adding the Warner Brothers assets and operation to their own. It would be a transformational deal for Netflix. But from a regulatory standpoint, yes, you're combining the number one streaming service with over 300 million subscribers to the number three or four, depending on what metric you use, streaming service in HBO Max, which is kind of like a classic monopoly. If the number one and the number three companies in any industry get together, that's going to raise some red flags. Of course, they would say that the combined company would only then be equal to YouTube, and they're kind of redefining the market about what digital video means. However, YouTube is in a different kind of business. Again, depending on what lens regulators choose to use here. Obviously, they're in a more user-generated content industry as opposed to the premium content of a Netflix or a Warner Brothers. I think from the industry standpoint, it didn't matter who bought these assets. There was going to be consolidation, meaning job loss, and meaning fewer buyers in the marketplace for content, which ultimately will drive prices down on the buy side if you're trying to sell a movie or a TV show. And more than likely, when there's consolidation, there'll be a price increase on the consumer side for a program like Netflix, or if HBO becomes a premium add-on to Netflix or something like that. Now, both sides are saying it's a pro-consumer, pro-worker deal. Of course, they would say that, but I think the consolidation is going to be tough for the entertainment industry, no matter how it ends up.
You're on the West Coast, Matt. I'm curious, what is Hollywood saying about this? Are they excited about this? I mean, you used the term job loss. Does merger automatically mean layoffs? We saw that with Paramount. I mean, what are they saying?
No, there will definitely be job loss. You can kind of read between the lines and see it when Netflix says there will only be $2 billion in cost efficiencies, and Paramount says we have found $6 billion in synergies. I mean, when you use language like that, what you're saying is, we have two people doing the same thing and we're going to fire one. That's exactly what happened when Skydance took over Paramount. 2,000 layoffs, $2 billion in cost cuts. No matter if Comcast, if Netflix, Warner, or if Paramount had won this bid, there would be layoffs at Warner Brothers Discovery. The entertainment industry is just contracting right now, and that's kind of the reality of it. It's not a very optimistic landscape looking forward in the next, 1 to 3 years. We don't know with something as just disruptive as like artificial intelligence as well, like what that landscape might look like in 3 years. Which again, if this deal is being going through regulation for 2 to 3 years, it could emerge out on the other side into a very different entertainment landscape than we have right now. But there's a reason why the Writers Guild, the Directors Guild, the Actors Guild are all putting out statements saying that this deal needs to be looked at long and hard. Writers Guild said that it must be blocked. Why you have filmmakers like James Cameron saying that Netflix takeover of Warner Brothers would be a disaster because they have said multiple times on the record that they don't believe in the theatrical business model. And of course, they're promising that they would keep movies in theaters for as long as they're probably legally obligated to. But then after that, they would be revisiting strategy down the road. So I think that again, the outlook is not incredibly optimistic at the moment.
And aside from consolidation, aside from job loss, aside from a pretty pessimistic outlook, when you look at these deals, I mean, what does this potentially mean for the entertainment industry at large?
Yeah, well, I mean, what it means is that there's one less player on the board, and especially with someone as historic as Warner Brothers, as you mentioned, one of the oldest studios, 100 years of history, a lot in Burbank, all those things could be, going the way of the dodo. If a technology company like Netflix does end up taking over, or really even if Paramount does and combines the two. I think this is one further step. If you think about, the Ellisons as a tech family, with Larry Ellison, of course, being founder of Oracle, or Netflix kind of being the great tech interloper, I think it's one further step in the tech industry kind of swallowing Hollywood whole. And they've clearly, already won that battle, if tech versus traditional entertainment, but now they're kind of just it seems like gobbling up every single asset they can find. So I think that again, we are in a state of disruption and a state of transition in the entertainment industry. And in 3 years, it could look very different. But if a studio with a brand like Warner Brothers, I mean Jack Warner, like one of kind of the foundational pieces of Hollywood, is gone, that's kind of sad if you're a sentimentalist.
And if you're looking at this, if you're someone who's followed this story, the Ellisons were the front runners in acquiring Warner Brothers. Netflix won the bidding war. Paramount launched the hostile takeover bid. What are the next steps here? What specifically are you looking out for next?
Well, I think we're going to see a lot of fighting in the press, or in press releases. At the very least, there's going to be a lot of like strong words on either side over the next few weeks. Like one person described it to me as a fist fight. I think that is pretty accurate about what the process is going to look like. The Ellisons could file a lawsuit that Warner Brothers negotiated in bad faith. It seems like, based on the letter they sent to David Zaslav last week, that could be in the offing. That seems unlikely to me that would be successful, but that could, temporarily block the deal from moving forward. Of course, if the Department of Justice files an antitrust lawsuit, that will kind of add to the process. Federal Trade Commission will, begin reviewing this deal over the next several months. Netflix says that it'll take 12 to 18 months, best case scenario. So I think that this will not be the last, probably even conversation that we have about this topic. I think there's many more shoes to drop. The Ellisons, they're offering $30 a share. I part of me thinks that he had texted David Zaslav that wasn't even their best and final offer. So they could, of course, increase their offer to shareholders to create kind of a give them an offer they can't refuse, to quote a Paramount property in The Godfather, and make things more interesting. So I do think that there are many, many more developments in this process to happen in the coming months.
And I know that we will talk about those developments, but as we sit here right now, we're still waiting for all these other shoes to drop. But is there any indication of who's in a better position right now? Is it Paramount or is it Netflix?
Well, it's Netflix because they have an agreement offer in place on the table. I mean, I think like if you were putting handicapping odds on it, the fact that they won the bidding war puts them in the best position possible. I tend to believe that this regulatory process will be really, really tough for them. I'm not saying that there's no chance that it goes through, but I think it will be mount the administration, whether Donald Trump gets involved or not, it will be a really, really tough antitrust case to make against them. And of course, from the Paramount side and the Ellison side, with the combination of David Ellison's money, Redbird Capital's money, we now know from a filing that there's $24 billion of sovereign wealth funds involved in this deal. They have the money, again, to get it done. If you're offering 80 billion, what's another 20 billion? What's another 20 on top of that? If they wanted to put it out there, they could. Of course, that would paint the narrative going forward to be, that they overpaid, and it would be tough for them to rebound off that. But I would say Netflix. Oh, sorry, Netflix is certainly in the best position, but I tend to think that the Ellisons are well positioned to keep the fight up.
Well, certainly a lot to look out for in this fight. Matt Craig, I always appreciate our conversations. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Brittany.